This is the world of Salesforce and Dropbox, HubSpot and Evernote, a world unthinkable without cloud software services. Most businesses and consumers use SaaS every day to get work done. Driven by the internet and ever-expanding availability of bandwidth, SaaS has come to dominate our lives in a very short span of time. But developing a defining service, often ahead of its time, getting users to engage, secure funding, protect IP, and building a truly remarkable and successful SaaS is not an easy task. SaaS Stories brings conversations with the dreamers and visionaries who dared to think ahead. How they built their SaaS, genesis, struggles, trials, tribulations, and eventually success. Welcome to SaaS Stories. Thank you for your time and for joining us in this session. I have a favor to ask. While you continue to listen to the podcast, please leave a comment or rating at iTunes or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I personally look at each comment and will give you a shout out to each of you in our following episodes. It means a lot to hear from you. Welcome to this episode of SaaS Stories. B2B sales is broken at many places. Nowhere is it more evident than the very low rate of conversions. CRM is stagnating, to say the least. We caught up with Abhijit Vijay Varghia, co-founder and CEO at Nectar.ai, where he is reimagining the future of B2B sales.
So I think number one pain point was that not every rep was getting successful. And I was talking to a lot of sales leaders, a lot of other VP sales in the community. And everybody had the same problem that, okay, there are a few of my folks who do really well, but there's a big cohort of salespeople who are struggling. And then there is a bottom workforce which needs to be replenished. Either they voluntarily churn or you have to let them go and then get new people in. And this whole cost of like changing salespeople and then getting new people on board, getting them trained, getting them coached, time to ramp, time to productivity is very hard. A lot of like time, effort, and money goes into it. And then if you add the missed quota, so a bad sales hire would typically cost an organization anywhere between $1.2 to $1.5 million.
Abhijit went through a seed-to-scale hyper-growth experience at Capillary Technologies, which is one of the earliest SaaS success stories from Asia. He was a board member and managing director for its APAC business and global accounts. While at Capillary, he specialized in creating global GTM growth strategy and execution, building and scaling high-performance SaaS sales teams, and delivering hyper-growth. In 2020, he started his new venture, Nectar.ai, where he is reimagining the future of B2B sales. The company is fully remote, venture-funded, and is currently in stealth mode. He is a chemical engineer and an alumnus from IIT Kharagpur and spent the early part of his career in the clean energy sector before moving to SaaS. He was ranked third in the top 80 emerging business leaders in Asia in the Portfolio Singapore magazine. Abhijit is one of the most sought-after SaaS sales leaders in Asia, an advisor to many startups, and an angel investor. Now, on to this insightful episode of SaaS Stories with Abhijit Vijay Varghia. Abhijit, welcome to SaaS Stories. I think it will be a very interesting chat and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for joining in.
Thank you for having me over, Subhanjan. I'm looking forward to the chat and sharing my experience with you and your audience as well.
Great. So I'll go a little back in your background. I mean, you're a chemical engineer from Kharagpur. You went to L&T. How did you transition from that into consulting and what happened thereafter which brought you to Capillary?
Yeah, so as you pointed out, I'm a chemical engineer. I went to IIT Kharagpur, and then in 2007, I had a few options: either go into IT, which most of my batchmates were going into, or going into consulting, go for an MBA, or actually try something what I studied. So I wanted to do that, use the chemical engineering that I learned for 4 years. So I joined Larsen & Toubro, which is a pretty big conglomerate in India. Joined their heavy engineering division. And interestingly, within that unit, they had a new business initiatives vertical, which was trying to launch a new product line. And they wanted to get into the alternative energy segment. So climate tech is anyway big and getting bigger as we speak. So this was like 2007. Early days. This was before I think Tesla got started, and before renewables energy was sexy. So the idea behind the new product line was to see if we can come up with some kind of a new product which caters into the whole alternative energy theme. So it was a very interesting project and role that I got. I spent 3 years there, largely looking at what are the possible paths we could take, because there's so many different ways you can like look at energy in general beyond oil or the conventional sources of energy. So we went through the route of hydrogen, because once you burn hydrogen, you get water vapor, right? H2 plus O2 gives you H2O. So we're quite keen to see how that can be commercially used in automobiles. So that was the path we took. I mean, that was like first principles, blue ocean thinking. Now there onwards, how do you like commercially produce hydrogen? How do you handle it as a fuel? And how do you go about creating the whole hydrogen economy in the ecosystem to make it viable? So it was starting from first principles to figuring out technology, the whole go-to-market strategy, what would be the role the company would play, what could be the product that will look like, who are the other collaborators and partners in the ecosystem, what do we need at a government level, what kind of lobbying we would need to do in order for this to make sense at a national level. So a lot of those aspects of business that played out, which really formulated my entrepreneurial roots. So while it was a larger conglomerate, but I was lucky enough to get into a new business unit where the team was hustling like a startup. So it was more like an entrepreneurial in residence kind of a role, where I really learned a lot. We made a good prototype. I mean, we actually worked on using the commercial scale autothermal reforming as a technology, which is used in oil refineries, where there's a hydrogen generation unit, which is pretty big. And you basically generate hydrogen on the site using natural gas. And then you use that hydrogen for the downstream processing of hydrocarbons. So we looked at that technology, that how autothermal reforming was doing, and can we build an autothermal reactor of smaller size? Think of it like a natural gas station in any of the fuel stations in India. And at that fuel station, could we accommodate a small portable skid-mounted hydrogen generation unit? So that's how we like went about doing it. That okay, let's solve the problem of generating hydrogen at a smaller scale, and then we'll figure out other ways of how that can be used into the fuels and things around it. So we went with that. We needed the process, which was patented by a company in US. We also needed a particular blend of fuel, which basically is called hythane. So that's like hydrogen getting combined with natural gas in a particular ratio. That fuel could be then used, which was more stable, because hydrogen alone cannot be used into automobiles directly. It's not very stable and it's very dangerous to use. So we then basically did a lot of this work. So there's a company in Australia which we had to acquire. There was a company in US with which we had to do a joint venture. So a lot of that work happened, which again gave me a lot of interesting insights into like the overall go-to-market. So there was the product thinking, then there was the whole broader go-to-market ecosystem thinking, and then it was about how do you create partnership in place, like where you need automobile lobby to like modify their engines to take the new fuel. We needed the oil marketing companies to help us with distribution, and we needed like approvals from government and energy and oil ministry to have the new fuel accepted and the whole hydrogen economy to start. So I was also lucky to be part of Hydrogen Association of India, which was the founding committee and body which started some of this work back in 2008. So I enjoyed like a great time working on something very interesting, something which would make a lot of sense for climate, and which was cutting edge new. So we did a lot of experiments. We came up with a prototype which was quite successful. It's still running at a natural gas station in Mumbai. I do visit it whenever I go to Mumbai. It's basically in Mulund. And then one roadblock that happened was largely the whole commercial viability and acceptance, right? I mean, it was still a fuel that was more expensive than its counterparts. So you need like it to be subsidized to be accepted. While it is a cleaner fuel, there's no lower NOx and SOx emissions. But we ran into some of these issues around like the commercial viability, and then the broader ecosystem where automobile lobby should step up and also modify their engines. the oil marketing companies need to support, and in general, like I think that so too many moving parts and regulatory hassles. So I just realized that in my lifespan, I might not be able to make a meaningful progress into this, and I would want to go into something more fast moving. So that was a point in time where I wanted to contemplate on what I could do next, and that's when I was looking at how the world was changing. And I did a big, a small consulting gig soon after L&T, and while I was doing that, I was thinking through what are the opportunities in front of us, and cloud seemed very interesting. I just heard about Salesforce. I'd heard about Amazon, how their technology was scaling up, e-commerce. So there's just like new things that were happening, and then
So this is like
smartphones.
2010, 11, 2012.
2010, 2011. Yeah, it is around that. So smartphones were like another interesting addition to the mix. So just looking at the trends around us, and I think software as a service caught my attention. And how SaaS could make it. I mean, could democratize access to premium software, right? I mean, otherwise it was all limited to like bigger companies investing a lot of money in implementing a big software solution. A lot of customization is needed, training is needed for the staff, and everything. A lot of money goes into maintenance later on. And I mean, not everybody could use the software before, but then SaaS opened a lot of possibilities. You could try. I mean, especially offered on the cloud, it's easy to implement. You can like implement at smaller scale, then pay as you grow. And their whole subscription model, by definition, makes everybody more productive and accountable. That it's not like you're sold something and you then basically are locked for 5 years. You have to like keep adding value and keep delivering a good solution in order to like get your client to continue with you. So I really like the whole model, and then how the approach changed with SaaS getting introduced into the overall business enterprise space. So I wanted to get into that, and that's a time where like a couple of folks from my college who started Capillary Technologies. It was like one of the first few SaaS startups out of the country. So I joined them, and at that time I was into customer success. They had started seeing some sort of a product market fit, and I was liking what they were doing largely as a consumer. It made a lot of sense, and then I felt I want to be part of it. It just is the right amalgamation. People I trust, the technology I like, and the space as a consumer I feel that anybody will benefit from. So I
So
joined
what
them.
was Capillary doing actually? What were they focused on primarily?
So we're largely looking at retail as an ecosystem, because retail was growing at a 35% CAGR year on year around 2011, and feature phones were getting. I mean, they were very popular. They were going deeper, but smartphones were getting introduced. So what it meant was that you had like. I mean, there was a scenario where everybody would have mobile. I mean, we probably could see that that time will come very soon, that almost everybody in the country will have mobile phone, and that becomes a very interesting thing if you look at in general consumer brands, right? I mean, they issue loyalty cards to the consumers, and there used to be a lot of paper cards or like physical cards that people used to carry, and a lot of time you'll not remember your card number, or there are like too many cards in your wallet, so you'll drop a few. But mobile number everybody remembers, right? So it's a 10-digit unique number. It could register a customer into a program. It's also a number you can communicate on. You can do SMS, or later on WhatsApp happened. And then basically it can actually improve the data capture problem which retailers used to face. So we actually created a retail-based CRM solution, which would largely help retail businesses engage with their consumers. So help capture more data, and then use that data to drive customers back into the store, and then use that intelligence to run more targeted marketing campaigns and loyalty programs. So that was like the concept. So I quite like retail as a space. It was growing, and then the whole use of mobile number as a unique identifier was a very smart move, and we were the first ones to introduce that into the country. So I did initially customer success, and then moved into product for a brief period, just to like give more inputs around what I was learning from customers on how they were using the product, and then moved into sales, because we saw product market fit. We were growing, so somebody had to sell the product. Founding team was selling, and I just started helping them. Yeah, one thing led to other, and then I accidentally moved into sales, which was I think the best thing that happened to me in 2013. And since then, there's no looking back from 2013 until 2019, end of 2019, when I was there at Capillary. We grew the business from a seed to scale, probably running the business around 18 plus countries, mostly Asia, because we're looking at markets which are big for retail and growing, offline retail. And yeah, over 50-member quota carrying sales team that I was managing concurrently across multiple countries. We used to take 150 flights a year. So very different times now. I've not taken a flight for for more than a year. But yeah, I used to take 150 flights a year until 2019. So it was a lot of fun. In scaling the business came with its own ups and downs, but a lot of learning in place. This was where I spent a lot of time on sales productivity, hiring salespeople, ramping them, scaling them, then also bringing predictability into the whole. So basically, science and art of selling, right? So art is what everybody talks about. Science is what we like to have more and more into sales. So trying to introduce more process, trying to introduce more structure. So I myself dealt with like a lot of pain points, both as an account executive, as a sales manager, as a first time sales manager, then as a VP of sales. So a lot of learning and a lot of hardships, which led me to keep thinking on what you can do to make the life of salespeople better. So I did a lot of things in terms of technology introductions, process implementation, training, coaching. But I just felt that there could be like a broader intervention technology could do. And I tried looking at a lot of tools. So 2018 to 2019, I looked at a lot of tools, both as a user, as a buyer, realized that the tools that were there were not helping with some of these pain points that I was facing. So I decided to go deeper, spend my time understanding the space, and I realized that globally, a lot of salespeople are struggling. Right? Forbes came up with an industry research report in 2019, which was like a big decision point for me. That 57% of account executives globally missed their numbers. That was in 2019. Then later on, CSO Insights published another report, which I think number was around 44 or 48%. And there's a bunch of this data point that got published by like very respectable forums. And largely everybody is talking about that a big portion of workforce misses their quota, and largely the sales teams. So just wanted to see what is the reason behind it and how technology can improve or change that. So the mission that I wanted to then embark upon was, can we democratize quota attainment? Why sales success should be limited to like a few rock stars in the company, or why a company should go into a feast or famine situation when some large deals are closing, you've done your quarter or you're overachieved, and when you lose those, then you basically have a struggle going on, and how do you like get more predictable? So some of those thoughts started weighing down. I decided to do something about it, and then like kickstarted Nectar.ai in 2020, February 2020. And that's when the whole COVID situation started unfolding, which basically brought on a very new problem statement in front of us as we're thinking through it. In terms of the whole world of sales was changing, selling and buying moved remote. And there are very different challenges now the sellers are facing, and there are very, very different expectations buyers started having from sellers. So which made the problem statement even more interesting, that how do you further deliver productivity? I mean, which is anyway hard in B2B sales. How do you then deliver it into a remote or distributed workforce? So that became even more interesting problem to solve. So we actually quite happy that we started the company in 2020, because it's one of those watershed moments that you can call, where you can take a very interesting perspectives and make interesting bets. Yeah.
So before we sort of talk about the impact or the change in thought process that COVID brought in 2019, when you were sort of contemplating this new product or the need for intervention, what were the typical pain points that you were seeing repeated across geographies and across various industries for the sales profession?
Yeah. So I think number one pain point was that not every rep was getting successful, right? So that was coming out very clearly there. Like, and I was talking to a lot of sales leaders, a lot of other VP sales in the community. And everybody had the same problem that, okay, there are a few of my folks who do really well, but there's a big cohort of salespeople who are struggling. And then there is a bottom workforce which needs to be replenished. Either they voluntarily churn or you have to let them go and then get new people in. So that continued to happen, right? And this whole cost of like changing salespeople and then getting new people on board, getting them trained, getting them coached, time to ramp, time to productivity is very hard. A lot of like time, effort, and money goes into it. And then if you add the missed quota, so a bad sales hire would typically cost an organization anywhere between 1.2 to 1.5 million dollars in terms of the salary and the quota that gets missed out and the associated costs around it. So, and then especially for hyper growth companies, you don't even get that time back, right? Timing is more important than anything else. So that was one problem that was coming out. That how do you like make more people successful in the organization? So most companies would probably raise more funding, and then they'll throw money at the problem by hiring extra sales capacity, and that would probably take them home. But that's not very capital efficient. So your cost of sales, etc., keeps going up, and you need to then further have more management layers to like manage a bigger force and all. So sales productivity was like primarily a big pain point on how do you like improve the yield out of the sales team that you've got. So that was one. Second was with respect to the coaching side of things, right? I mean, I've personally been a salesperson. I've learned on the job, and most salespeople I've spoken to, they all learn on the job. The most first line managers also learned on the job, right? No, there's no formal. We don't teach sales in universities and colleges, right? I mean, we learned it on the job. Then we don't teach sales management in colleges again, right? We learned it on the job, and most of the sales managers were like good account executives who became sales managers later on. So they were coached or trained in a particular way. They just follow the same thing, which is largely going on a Monday call, asking about, tell me about that deal, tell me about how much you're going to deliver this quarter, and it's basically a conversation which later on results into interrogation, and which is not like very healthy as well in terms of the peer-to-peer interaction or the team productivity or morale as well. So the point I'm trying to make is how you can probably systematize the culture of coaching, right? How do you get the coaching experience better, both for the first-time manager and the AE? The third problem we looked at was the visibility into the ground truth. Now, CRM is going to be the core system of record, right? I mean, it's supposed to hold all the data. Unfortunately, the big pain point there is that nobody likes to update CRM. I mean, you'll not find any single salesperson who says, I enjoy working on CRM. You'll hardly find anybody. I mean, for any other SaaS tool or any other tool, you will at least find one user who's happy. But CRM would be the only tool out there where no user of theirs, and the user here I'm talking about is account executive, would say that they like working on it, right? I mean, it's forced upon them. So either there's a stick or carrot, but they updated CRM because they have to. It's not that they get anything in return. So that was the third pain point, that you're basically making a salesperson do a lot of effort, a lot of work, and in return, that is not helping them achieve or attain any core KPIs. What it just ends up happening is give more visibility into the leadership. So there are 2 points that are coming out. Leadership needs visibility into the ground truth, and the salesperson needs to provide data to give that visibility. And there's a big friction point. So these were like 2 other pain points that originated. That how do you still provide visibility to the leadership that they need, and at the same time, how do you make it easier for the salesperson to be able to provide the data that they need to provide in a hassle-free automated manner, at the same time get the right input or insights they need from the system to do their job better, which is like closing more deals and meeting their numbers. So we just narrowed down on some of these points, and then just wanted to look at this holistically from the modern future of work that's there in front of us, where the teams are further distributed. You can't do like a ride along in a car and your VP sales or manager coaches you, or you can't do a trip together anymore with your manager, or manager is not able to do like the business trip or field visit where they can like meet all the customers, meet all the salespeople, get to know the pulse of every deal, get to know the pulse of every salesperson. Everything has to happen remotely. Everything is happening digitally. The good thing is a lot of data is getting generated, which was not there before. A lot of informal data is getting digitally captured. But the big problem is that it's further creating a lot of data silos, and the whole problem of updating CRM is becoming even more paramount, right? So some very interesting things started unfolding as we started looking at the future of work as well, which is in front of us.
It's time for a short break. Abhijit was explaining how the sales process has gone digital and remote. I asked him, in the light of the fact that remote organizations are not really new, Basecamp and Zapier cases in point, what is COVID doing to this trend which is now undeniably mainstream? We will listen to Abhijit's take as we come back from the break. Stay with us.
You are listening to a Business Podcast Network original. Podcasting is the fastest growing content marketing opportunity which is untapped. We can help you craft your audio strategy and help leverage the wide reach and easy streaming capability that the smartphone penetration provides. It is easy, it is powerful and personal. Talk to us to find out how podcasting can help you build your brand and reach out to your targets like never before. Write to us at bpn@bizcast.in. That is bpn@bizcast.in. Business Podcast Network. Podcasts end to end.
Welcome back. I'm Shubhanjan Sarkar, your host for SaaS Stories and founder of Pitchling, the buyer-seller engagement platform. Right before the break, I asked Abhijit what was the impact of COVID on the trend of going remote, especially on sales teams. Listen in. As we know that remote work is nothing new. I mean, this was sort of in the making, Zapier being successful or Basecamp. Jason Fried wrote the book on being remote, working remote many, many years back. It has nothing to do with COVID. But what COVID definitely did was accelerate that process. So what kind of changes did you see to this analysis that you had COVID bring in? Is it just saying, okay, this has to be done faster, or was there other dimensions which came in?
I think the biggest dimension that came in is that how do you bring all of this data together and how do you improve collaboration? I think data and collaboration came out as the biggest drivers in terms of value creation, right? I mean, how do you plug the missing data, because CRM will never be fully complete, right? I mean, people will not update it. And the second point is collaboration, right? I mean, as a seller, I need to collaborate with my manager, my pre-sales person, my marketing person, my SDR, my customer success person. At the same time, I need to also collaborate with my buyer. So my buyer is also digital and remote, right? So there's no more wine and dine that's happening. So how do I professionally engage with my buyer, get them the value that they need, get them to get the confidence around how their pain points could get addressed by my solution, and how do I navigate the buying side of equation, right? So the buying committee, how do I navigate and meet everybody or cover all the objections? So it started unfolding a lot of different set of problems, right? I mean, it's nothing new, but the way it's to be done, right, in a remote setting made a lot of difference. And finally, I think data, once captured, connected and captured, can be very meaningful in illuminating the path for everybody involved, right? Whether it's buyer to get the right confidence, AE to probably get the right help they need in coaching their buyer and getting coached to sell better, and for manager to be able to get the timely intervention risk and signals about how their quarter could look like, rather than how their quarter went. Right? Typically, we would get into a postmortem of lost one analysis is very common in a QBR. But instead of doing that, can you proactively look at your leading indicators and take a call on what preventive action you can take to avoid a future situation? Yeah.
So as you are planning a Nectar, I mean, obviously both these two pieces that you're talking of, collaboration and coaching, has seen a huge growth in terms of these independent spaces, whether you're talking of products like Gong and Chorus and so on, which are essentially sort of plugged into that space, and a bunch others. And on the other hand, in collaboration, products like Slack, which was like ubiquitous, and they were adding the outside company portions and all that. How did you think that Nectar, as you were designing it at that point of time, would do it one better, or do it differently, which will make more sense?
Yeah, so I think collaboration and data-driven coaching, these are the two important pillars that I believe are important. So the way we look at it is, you need to, I mean, I don't look at competition, or I don't look at what exists in the market today. What I focus on is what is the pain point of my target customer, or my buyer, or the user of my product. So we go with that angle, and what are they struggling today, and what we can help them with. I think that gives better answers than looking at what. Obviously, I mean, it's important to look at the landscape, but I think the most important thing one needs to do when you're building a product, is SaaS product, is looking at who is your user, what are their problems, what is the cost of not solving those problems today, why they're not able to solve those problems, and what's stopping them in solving those problems today or tomorrow. So you spend a lot of time in those first principles thinking, understand these with your users very closely. So we realize that there's increasing need to build it more bottoms up than top down. There are a lot of products that exist for the VP sales or the sales leadership. When you look at just the basic collaboration between, let's say, the SDR and the account executive, I mean, it's, as you mentioned, they'll probably do it on Slack or WhatsApp or just a call, like that, right? Or I think on the buyer seller side of it, right? I think the companies like PitchLink, right? I mean, you guys are doing a good job there. I think other interesting products coming out in this space. How do you make that better, right? So we started looking at specific pain points here, and one pain point that came out to us from a AE standpoint was that they don't like updating Salesforce, right? So one clear answer, anytime I go and talk to any AEs, I mean, they just like hate CRM and they don't want to update it. So that keeps coming up in conversations. With managers, it's all about that. I mean, my team is spread out. I don't know what they're up to. While I have some data in CRM, it's not reliable. I'm using certain tools. They give me partial visibility. How do I know, like, at the right time, I can be there with my salesperson to guide them? So not just coach retrospectively on what you did on that call, or how many times this competitor name came and how I could have handled objection, but be there when it is happening, or be there before the meeting and guide them that this is what you should be doing, right? I mean, think of it like sports, right? Where you have a coach who is not, I know, obviously you do post-match analysis, but you also do a lot of pre-match coaching,
Of
and
course.
during the match coaching that really swings the game.
Yeah.
So can you bring that parallel into sales? So that's how I'm approaching it. And finally, for doing all of this, the most professional and successful teams would use a lot of data, and they will do a lot of collaboration before, during, and after the match. And that's what you can do in sales as well. So how do you bring all of that data together and then drive a better collaboration? Once you do that, I think productivity is bound to happen. Then you're talking about use cases, then you handle, right? I mean, whether the use case is about ramping a salesperson, or use case is about forecasting your next quarter, or it's use case about your revenue intelligence, then they all become use cases. But fundamentally, what you're trying to look at is that making your salespeople here become better at their job, solving their pain points, and then driving the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle, which I believe is data and collaboration. The good thing is, in the remote work environment, we've already started collaborating a lot more than we used to. And we also started generating a lot of digital data which didn't exist before. But the pain today is connecting the dots, bringing all of this together, because there are like so many different silos that exist across the revenue function, in terms of tools, in terms of data, in terms of like process. So how do you like connect everything together and guide this? So the way we visualize our solution at Nectar is that we're going to build an industry first go-to-market data platform, that connects the siloed tools and missing digital data for the modern revenue teams, and bringing it together, connecting it to their playbooks, and then boosting the collaboration and productivity with the help of leading indicators rather than just giving them a postmortem of what happened, right? I'm a big believer on managing by leading indicators, and I think at leadership level that happens, where the VP sales or the CEOs would look at leading indicators, but if you bring in the same experience for the SDR or the account executive or the marketer or the sales manager, I think it can do wonders. So going bottoms up, and then bringing out the collaboration and data for today's modern sales process. Yeah.
I know that you are in a private beta right now, so you're essentially getting uh, accounts which are willing to give you feedback and test it out and so on. This phase, according to you, is going to continue for the rest of the year before you take it to market next year. What are your typical channels of go to market that you are considering or testing out today?
So today we are not like actively selling the product. I mean, when we started the company, we really wanted to work closely with like some key users who come from our ideal customer profile, and just spend a lot of time with them, understanding their daily workflow, their week, their month, their quarter, understanding their workflow on how they're like collaborating at a downstream level. Where are the pain points that are emerging? How are they managing their task? How are they managing their follow-ups, or how are they managing their weekly cadence, things like those, right? So that involves a lot of discovery, that involves a
Sure.
lot of deep work with our users, and that's what we did in the first few months as we started. We also spent a lot of time understanding the macro in terms of how it was unfolding due to COVID, how the whole buying selling experience was changing. People were not traveling, so mobile is not getting used, but people have started moving back to desktop. There are other tools which are improving in adoption, like for example, Zoom and Slack. Both their adoption went up. So a lot of those things also came out in our research. So the 2020 was a year for us to do a lot of customer discovery and validating the problem statement, and then nailing down on what problem to solve.
So at this point,
2020,
you had no product to offer them. You are just sort of
it was an alpha product. We'd created an
alpha.
alpha product,
Okay. Okay.
mock-ups, which we are like showing
Okay.
to them. So we are
Okay.
like talking to a lot of users,
And
understanding the
how
pain
many
point and then
companies were you
validating.
talking to? Sorry.
We would have spoken to over 100 plus companies
Okay.
across different markets in US, Europe, Australia, Southeast Asia, India.
Huh.
Over 150 plus chief revenue officers slash VP sales. Probably some 75 odd account executives, 50 odd first line managers. So we spoke to a lot of people.
Right. And
Did a
how
bunch
many of them
surveying
were
as
you
well.
deciding to give the alpha product to test it so that you can get more
To a few
aligned?
of them.
Huh.
To
Okay.
a few of them, not to all. I mean, the idea
Okay.
here was not to sell and just understand
Sure.
their pain point and
Sure.
then
Sure.
validate some of the hypotheses we had.
Sure.
2021 was when we created a beta product. I mean,
Okay.
early Feb of 2021 when we created a beta product basis the problem statement that we had. And then we started offering to some of our early adopters, because during the course of our interactions we identified there were some really good design partners that we could like work with, who could like truly spend a lot of time with us in iterating on the product experience, iterating on the core use cases that we wanted to solve for. And that's what we did, right? So between Feb to June we spent a lot of time working with these design partners in really improving our product experience and then solving a real problem. And all our design partners fully validated it and signed contracts, multi-year contracts with us. So that's happened. Now the next stage of the company's journey is moving from design partners. So it's a modern GTM process that we are like taking, which is slightly different than the conventional. So from design partners, now we are moving to early adopters. So idea is to like go and work with the next set of early adopters, would spend time with us, but who also are not okay with like a buggy product, but they want more functional product, right? So you need to definitely have some more maturity in the product. So we are there now to offer this to our early adopters, and that's what we started doing. And then the next set of work that we'll be doing would be with like a general availability launch, and then offering it to the early majority, right? I mean, once you launch in the market, there'll be some early majority that will come up and look into your product, and then later on you will start offering it to everyone, which includes your late adopters as well, right? So that's how we'll go about doing
Sure.
it. Yeah.
So this design partners came out of the outreach that you had done already.
Yeah, a combination of outreach and the network we had,
Right.
like folks who were quite interested in what we are doing. So there were a lot of well-wishers and folks in the network who
Sure.
wanted to be participate. So we had like a good mix of people, users would like meaningful enough and who were having a real pain point. We did not do any free pilots. I mean, we were always clear that we'll only work with customers who want to solve a particular pain point as of yesterday, and they would be willing to put money on the table. So that was our criteria as well, that let's
Okay.
not work with anybody who cannot put money on the table to solve this problem. That means their problem is not relevant enough or important enough, right? I mean,
Yeah, intense
so
enough.
some of
Yeah.
those questions we had. Yeah.
So how many design partners did you end up working with?
So we had like close to a dozen
Okay.
design partners, largely which we shortlisted, and so we worked with a few of them. And then now idea is to like work with more early adopters. So probably go to like, let's say, how quickly we can work with, let's say 25 to 50 early adopters, get them really successful with the product, validate and repeat the experience.
Right.
Also, I mean, as startup, when you start building a product, a lot of things you do in a scrappy way, right? I mean, you do things that break. In fact, Y Combinator and some of the other accelerators teach you to do that, and which is very efficient and the right thing to do, because initially you need faster iterations, validations, and once you hit gold, then you double down on it, and then that's when you start investing into building a full-fledged product, right? So we also did the same thing, and as we continued to dig interesting use cases, we productize them.
Right.
So 2021 also gives us more time to productize and scale our backend, so that once we launch it for general availability, we should be able to like offer not just a very high feature-rich product which solves pain points, but also a very stable, robust product which
Fair
scales as well.
enough. What are the typical size, size of these deals that you have done already? These multi-year deals that you have.
So we have mid-market companies as focus, so it's a typical mid-market segment deal values that we look at. Yeah.
So which is like 10K to 20K, or it's more than that per annum?
So the typical mid-market deal values, industry deal values for SaaS would be anywhere between 10 to 50K
Yeah.
ARR. Yeah.
So it's the same thing. And when you go to the market, your pricing will be similar, or you intend to sort of have a little higher, sort of push it up a bit more?
So we definitely offered some discount to our early access customers, largely to obviously, I mean, give back something in return for the trust that they are putting in on an early product. But yeah, when you offer it for general availability, the price would be slightly different.
Sure.
Yeah.
And
It
these are
will be
like,
the best price. Yeah.
sorry, and these are like 20 to 50 salespeople each who are on the platform. Will that be a right assumption?
For a typical client of ours,
Yeah.
yeah, we go for the mid-market companies, right? So again,
Yeah.
those are like anywhere between, let's say, 500 to 2,000 employees would be the right segment. Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of the users will be your sales guys, right, of that company?
Yeah, so like typically 10 to 20% of the workforce would be sales,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
So if you look
that's
at
pretty
500
large.
to 2,000 employees,
Yeah.
like 100.
Yeah, that's
50
quite
to 100
large.
salespeople.
Yeah. From where you are, what are the next steps? I mean, continuing this early adapter piece for the next part of the year, and then take it to the market next year. Is that how you're thinking?
Yeah, so we are quite excited with the way product is shaping up. We're very excited with the feedback from our early set of users.
Yeah.
The idea is to like improve on product experience. We haven't hired a salesperson, but we've already hired customer success people.
Right.
So we are investing in that first to make sure that our customers get the value out of the product. And once we are fully ready, we'll be launching it for a general availability, which we're looking to make it. I mean, we have a lot of requests for early access. We've opened up our early access program. We've got like 200 plus companies who are registered for the early access. So we got a big pipeline to execute as well. So the idea is that we run through that as well as we offer it for the general market, be ready on the product and GTM side, and launch it in 2022. Yeah,
Sure.
That's
Okay.
what we're aiming for. Yeah.
Sounds
We also
great.
raised some funding in between.
Okay.
We had a $2 million seed round, $2.15 million dollar seed round we raised in November of 2020.
Okay.
And yeah, we probably would hit some milestones around that as well.
So, how many people in the team today?
So it's a lean team. We've got 12 people. We are a fully remote team. We are a big believers in productivity ourselves, in transparency and data-driven accountability. So from day one, our culture is also same. We've got people in 5 countries now.
Okay.
We have diversity and inclusion is a big cultural pillar for us as a company too. 50% of our staff workforce is females, and we also got 6 different nationalities working with us already out of the 12 people. So it's pretty interesting, diverse workforce, which we are quite proud of. And we're drinking our own beer as well. So we use Nectar for Nectar. So we use it for our day-to-day productivity as we start talking to more customers, go through our leads. So we use our own product as well. Yeah.
This dissatisfaction with CRM, which sort of seemed to be your trigger, is a very well-known peeve. It's a pet peeve of many people, right? And a lot of people are trying to solve that problem. I mean, there are a lot of people who are trying to fix CRM. So, do you see CRM getting fixed, or do you see that CRM will actually become something else?
I think CRM is already part of the system, which is system of record. So for any business, you would have a system of record, which would most likely be a CRM system, where you'll have all your records around your leads, contacts, opportunities, codes, accounts, and everything else, right? So it's a record management system. Then you'll need like a system of intelligence on top of it, which basically will make sense out of the data that you have. And CRM is not the only data source that an organization possesses, right? You have like multiple other data silos that exist, and we already discussed a lot during this podcast today that data doesn't flow into CRM the way we would all want it to be. So you need like a system of intelligence, which would probably tie into CRM as one of the inputs. And that system of intelligence would tie back into a system of action, which would probably enable triggers and actions for the users across. Again, I think for a distributed team, it makes even more sense to get those triggers, right? I mean, which are not possible with because of the face-to-face interaction that is getting reduced. So you would have a system of record which is where CRM's place would be, and it is getting there. You'll have system of intelligence where you'll have companies like Nectar who can play a part, and then there'll be system of action, which is where I think a lot of future interesting opportunities would come in. And these could be system of actions which could be built into the existing collaboration systems as well, or systems of communication, right? Where you have like a WhatsApp, email, Slack, Telegram, and whatnot, right? You already have a lot of this communication layer built in the enterprise. So how do you or Microsoft Teams for that matter? So how do you get actions done using those already established communications, right? So that's where those integrations come in, and you can see that pattern as well. I mean, say if you look at Salesforce acquisition in the last 5 years, you'll see the trend. They are a system of record. They acquired a lot of companies to tie together Einstein, which is their intelligence product, and then they've acquired Slack now for collaboration. So now they have a big roadmap to tie everything together and present it as one product to the world, and then they have got 200,000 customers to service. So there's an interesting opportunity for startups like Nectar to go and take a small portion of that big pie that exists. Yeah,
it is that Tom Tunguz's post. I don't know. You must have looked at that, right? So take 1% of Salesforce, the dissatisfied part, and you got $1 billion business, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
SaaS Stories is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform. PitchLink enables high-quality interactions between buyers and sellers through presentation and discussion modules. Sellers create personalized sales presentations and reach out to prospects through a non-intrusive, buyer-qualified engagement. PitchLink requires no installation or download and holds the entire repository of sales collaterals and buyer-seller conversation. Talk to us to know more about how you can engage with customers without intrusion. Call us on 990-216-3132. That is 990-216-3132. 3132. Okay, Abhijit, this was great chat, and I would love to stay in touch and see maybe 6 months, 8 months down the line how things are shaping up, and continue this dialogue.
Definitely. Thanks for having me over, Subhanjan, and we'll stay in touch with you. Take care. Stay safe.
You too. Thank you. We have a fantastic lineup over the next couple of episodes with great conversations, including Robert Tucrocki, Managing Director for Microsoft Startups MEA, Lazar Rosiran, Co-founder and CEO of Spoke, and many more. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you do not miss a single episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for being with us today and listening to this episode of SaaS Stories. This is where I speak with the dreamers and visionaries who dared to think ahead and build world-class SaaS products. We hope this conversation helped you with the insights that you can go and apply right now to your own SaaS journey. We hope to have you here with us again in the next episode of SaaS Stories. SaaS Stories is brought to you by PitchLink, the buyer-seller engagement platform, and is a BizCast original production.